Good evening. Welcome to the Fright Files. My name is Chris Harmon, but as usual, you can call me Dr. Fright. Tonight, you will hear tales of the most frightful stories you've ever heard, ranging from the least frightful to the most haunting of them all. If you, the viewing audience, are ready, then please ask yourself one question. Can you survive down to the last story? With that being said, welcome to the Fright Files. Let's begin, shall we? Our first story is called The Mysterious Creature with Red Eyes. The witness says, this incident happened a long time ago and never told too many people about it. I'm 31 years old. I'm a 31-year-old Native American, and I was maybe 6 or 7. It was night, and my sister and cousin were playing. Then the doorbell rang, and one of us answered the door. But there was no one there. Well, this happened 2 or 3 more times. We had a little house dog. We also had a Saint Bernard. And my sister and cousin noticed that the house dog was crouched under a chair in our living room. The last time the doorbell rang, we all went outside and couldn't see no one around. We all stood out on the porch. It was maybe a half hour later. My oldest brother went to the refrigerator. The rest of us kids were playing in the hallway. When he came running down the hallway with his hands to his face and crying hysterically, he ran in our parents' room and jumped on the bed, landing on his stomach. He was crying pretty bad. We all kept asking him, what was wrong? What was wrong? What happened? And he finally told us what he saw. Ladies and gentlemen, what you're about to see could be a little bit frightening for your eyes. As we load the photo of Fright Files Episode 1. He told us what he saw. He said he saw something peeking around the trees, and he said it was moving to him like, come on, come out here, come out here, come out here. That's when he freaked out. After about 15 minutes, he calmed down some. Then there was knocking at the door, this time the back door, and they were knocking. It was like the door needed to be opened now. When we opened the door, a guy who lived a few houses away came in, as white as a sheet, and was shaking pretty bad. He said he broke down a ways from our place, and when he was walking up the road, he heard something walking in the woods with him. He didn't know what it was. He said he was really glad to see our lights on. No, our parents weren't home. But we ended up calling our uncle who lives next door to us. Now you see, he was really glad to see the lights on, as our parents weren't home. Uncle arrived a few minutes after we called, and they had their shotguns with them. They came and talked with the guy that came to our house. I think one of my uncles took him home. There were 6 of us kids. One was our cousin. My uncle went outside to look around. My oldest sister and our cousin wanted to go out as well. When they opened the back door, our St. Bernard, well, let me tell you, for the size of those dogs, that dog would not let those girls outside. And he even growled at them. Well, my sister and cousin backed up from the door, and as they did, that St. Bernard came running into the house. The St. Bernard came running into the house. Well, my sister and cousin still went outside, and as they were standing by this little trail by the house, that's when everything changed. You see, they noticed something dark from at the bottom of the hill. They thought maybe it was a stump, but then the stump moved and turned to look at them. My cousin said it had red eyes. As they came back inside right away, our cousin went out again and went around the house to the front. And when she got to the corner of the house, she looked up towards my uncle's garage and said she saw something peeking around the garage. She said she thought it was one of our other cousins, but she noticed this had a cone-shaped head as it looked around the garage towards our house. Now they ended up putting us kids to bed, she says. All 3 of us, my sister and I and cousin. I was pretty scared. And our little brother, he had a crib. Didn't really know what was going on, of course. My sister and I were shaking in bed. Our brother's crib was right next to the window. We were really hoping whatever was out there didn't come to our window. Now, folks, this is where the story gets a little bit more frightful. Because you see, as the witness says, my sister and I were shaking in bed. We were just so scared it seemed like forever when our parents got home. And when they did, we told them what happened. My mother ended up calling a spiritual guide, and he told her that there was probably 3 of those things around the house that night. And he also told her that they were looking for a boy to take. He said that one of them may have lost one of their own and was coming looking for a young boy to replace the one they lost. Folks, that was frightful story number 1. And as we go down the list, these stories get a little bit more creepy, a little bit more intense, and a little bit more frightful. Let's move on to story number 2. This story is called The House of Hauntings. As the witness states, I was in the kitchen of the family room. I was in the kitchen of the family room. I lived here taking care of my parents for nearly a decade. Mom had died. Dad was in a nursing home. I was about to shut off the lights and go to another part of the house when I got a whiff of Dad's cologne. It wasn't strong, but strong enough. It smelled through the room. There's something about an aqua velvet man cologne that lets you know. I chalked it up to my imagination, but the scent held on. I said out loud to the silent house, "Well, Dad must have just died," and laughed at myself when I said that. Those with a Gothic disposition are prone to making superstitious statements, said the witness, and I felt kind of stupid for failing and falling into the same trap. I came upstairs and sat down at my desk and started to work when the phone rang. It was the nursing home. "Come right away." That wasn't the first real ghost story in this house for me. Uh-uh. No, says the witness. They started long before I was 5. Disembodied scents, lights switching on and off, footsteps, the usual ghostly occurrences. The first time was a full-bodied apparition, and it wouldn't be the last time I saw it here. No, it wouldn't be the last time. It wasn't the last time. My parents told me it was my imagination, so I spent most of my childhood believing I was crazy. You see, people who believe in such things are crazy, right? Then when I was in my 30s, I told my mother, and she laughed. Turns out she'd seen it too, as had her mother. My dad wouldn't talk about what he saw, but he was afraid of the house. I thought the spirits in this house had finally found a peace. While I lived elsewhere for over 30 years, but over the past couple of years, I've come home to find 2 house guests sitting on my porch at night, having chose not to stay in the house alone after disturbing occurrences. And those are just the people who will talk about it. So it's safe to say, growing up in this house and coming back to it, I come by this stuff naturally. I don't have to look real hard to find ghosts. They're right here in the house. Well, folks, that was story number 2. And as the frightful tales move on and on, the stories get a little bit more darker, more deeper, more frightful. If you're ready to take the plunge into the depths of the unknown, we will move on to frightful tale number 3. This tale is called the woman in the red hoodie. A nighttime bike ride. What could go wrong, right? Growing up, I always wanted to go on a bike ride at night. Something about it seemed really cool to me. But it wasn't until I was 13 that my mother finally let me go alone at night. She told me to wear my helmet, have my phone, take a flashlight, and she set the parameters for me where I was allowed to go. You see, she gave me about 4 miles, which was a lot. So right after the sun set, I was off. I loved it. There was no people out walking their dogs, no kids running around. The temperature was perfect. It was really fun, so fun that I ignored the limits of my mom's rules. You see, where I was biking was all walking paths. It was one of those grassy areas between two neighborhoods. There's this long path that went at least 600 feet at a 25-degree angle. I was flying down that hill, having an absolute blast, and darted right through the perimeter, and darted right through the parameters my mother had set. My mother had set these limits for a reason. Everything on this inside was close to house and people, but the outside was more specifically, the place the path I was on lead to was barren. I rode along this path for 10 minutes before I could only see some of the lights of the houses on the inside of the limits. After 15 minutes of riding along this dirt path, that's when it all began to happen. That's when everything took a turn for the worst. That's when this frightful tale really, really got scary. You see, I heard singing. And it sounded about 30 to 40 feet in front of me, says the witness. I stopped riding to hear it better. It was a woman's voice. She was singing Eleanor Rigby by the Beatles. But she wasn't singing the words, just the melody of the vocals. Her voice was strange. You know how you can sound when your voice gets scratchy? Well, that's what her voice sounded like. And as I inch forward to try and see her, I get close enough to see the silhouette of hair bouncing up and down, like she was headbanging. I decided to get my flashlight out, and I'm thinking that maybe this person is in need of help or something. Or maybe this is an insane person and the light will scare them away. So I took the flashlight out of my pocket. I pointed it directly on her. The moment that light hit her, she stopped moving completely. She was facing away from me. She had disgusting hair that seemed to be sticking together in clumps. Some of the hair was ripped off too. She was wearing a very oversized bright red hoodie. I repeat, she was wearing an oversized bright red hoodie, and I was almost too scared to move, and I think she was too. I conjured up as much bravery as I could and said, Sorry, I'm in a very oops kind of manner. I said, I'm sorry. I turned off the flashlight and put it back in my pocket. She didn't respond. But then, just as I was turning my bike around, She screams in an awful, awful high-pitched voice. And as I throw myself back onto the bike, I hear the voice getting closer, 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 and I book it as fast as I can. I didn't look back, and I didn't stop pedaling, and her screaming grew quieter and quieter and quieter until it dissolved into the howling of the wind. That was story number 3 of the Fright Files. Let's move on to story number 4. I call this story The Hungry Doll. And if you've made it this far, then you are a fan of the Fright Files. The image of the third story I will share in the comments later after the show. I apologize for not putting the frightful photo in tonight's story. But here we are. Story number 4, The Hungry Doll. And I gotta warn you folks, just reading this story before the show sent chills down my spine. I can't get this image and story out of my head. You see, in the quiet village of Grey Moor, nestled between rolling hills and thick forest, there was a tale whispered among the children. A tale of a doll unlike any other. This story was simple yet very terrifying, because, beware, the hungry doll. They would say a small porcelain figure with wide staring eyes and a mouth that seems too big for its face. The doll, it was said to come to life at night, feeding on the souls of those who dare to neglect it. Feeding on the souls who dare to neglect it. But Sophia had always loved her dolls. She had a collection of them, each one carefully placed on a shelf in her room. There, dressed meticulously arranged, their hair combed and braided. Her favorite was a rag doll with button eyes and a soft stitched smile. But that changed one day when a package arrived from a distant relative, an aunt she hadn't seen in years. And then she began to think maybe she never even met this aunt. She could hardly remember. But inside that package was a hungry doll. The hungry doll. Sophia's first impressions was one of awe. This doll was exquisitely crafted, with a dress made of the finest silk and hair that shone like sponge gold. Its porcelain face was delicate, almost lifelike, with wide, glossy eyes that seemed to follow her every move. But there was something unsettling about it. Something unsettling about its mouth. You see, its mouth was slightly open, revealing teeth that seemed very sharp and very realistic. Sophia's mother, charmed by the doll's beauty, placed it on a shelf with Sophia's other dolls. Now Sophia, however, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something wrong with this doll. She would catch its eye staring at her even when she wasn't looking directly at it. At night, the feeling intensified, as if the doll was watching her, waiting, waiting for her, waiting. The first night after the hungry doll arrived, Sophia was awoken by a faint scratching sound, like tiny claws scraping against the wood. She sat up in her bed, her heart pounding, 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 but the room was silent. She looked over at her she looked over at her shelf where her doll sat in a neat, clean row. The hungry doll in the center, its white eyes gleaming in the dim light. She told herself it was just her imagination, nothing to worry about, and eventually she fell asleep. But the next morning, something was different. Oh, yeah, something was different. You see, her favorite doll, her favorite rag doll, had been moved. It was no longer sitting in the upright position with the others. It was instead slumped over, its button eyes facing the wall, almost as if it had been deliberately turned away from the hungry doll. Sophia frowned, but her mother dismissed it, saying it must have fallen over during the night. However, Sophia knew her dolls never moved on their own. The scratching sounds continued every night, growing louder and louder and louder and more intense. Sophia began to dread the nights, lying awake in bed, clutching her blankets tightly as the sounds crept through the darkness. She started to notice other changes too. Her dolls were often found in different positions, their faces turned away from the hungry doll, as if they were trying to escape its glazed eyes. Sophia tried to ignore it, but the fear grew stronger. The fear grew stronger at her. She began to feel like a prisoner in her own room, unable to escape the doll's watchful eyes. She tried to move the hungry doll to a different shelf, but no matter where she placed it, its eyes seemed to follow her, always watching, always waiting, always watching, and always waiting. One night, Sophia awoke with a startling cold sweat clinging to her skin. The room, the room was deathly silent, the air thick with stillness. She felt a presence in the room, something dark, something dark, something deathly silent. The air thick and malevolent. Slowly she turned her head towards the foot of the bed, and there it was. There was the hungry doll, standing on her bed, its eyes wide open, gleaming in the moonlight that filtered through the curtains. The doll's mouth began to open slowly and deliberately revealing sharp needle-like teeth that gleamed in the dim light. Sophia's breath caught in her throat, her body frozen with fear. She wanted to scream, she wanted to run, but her limbs wouldn't obey her. The doll began to move, crawling up the bed, its tiny hands clutching the blankets as if drew closer and closer and closer, in a voice that sounded like the rustling of the dead leaves. The doll whispered, "I'm hungry. I'm hungry. I'm hungry. I'm hungry." Sophia's heart pounded in her chest as the doll crawled closer, its cold porcelain hands reaching out to touch her skin. She felt a sharp pain as the doll's teeth sank into her neck, not tearing flesh, but something deeper, something more vital. It was as if the doll was draining her very life force, consuming her essence with every bite. Her vision blurred, and a wave of exhaustion swept over her. The room grew darker. The world faded away as the doll continued its feast. Sophia tried to scream, but no sound would come out. The last thing she saw was the doll's wide, staring eyes filled with an insustainable hunger. When morning came, Sophia's parents found her lying in bed, pale and lifeless, her skin cold to the touch. The doll sat on her chest, its eyes now dull, its mouth closed, the sharp teeth hidden once more. The doll was placed back on the shelf, a strange, heavy silence settling over the room. The villagers whispered about Sophia's death, but no one dared to speak of the hungry doll. It remained on the shelf, its once vibrant eyes now dark, if sated for the time being. But the villagers knew the truth. The doll was always hungry, always waiting, always hungry, always waiting. And so the children of Greymore were warned to take care of their toys, to cherish them and keep them close. But the hungry doll remained watching from its perch, its hunger growing with each passing day, waiting for the next child to come along, to love it, to neglect it, and to become its next victim. I want to thank everybody in the chat room for watching these frightful tales. And if you, the viewers at home, are too scared to continue on, then you are not a fan of Dr. Fright. But if you're still here, ready to move on to our next frightful tale, this is one of those tales you probably won't want to share or bring up during Christmas holidays. Because this tale is not about the holidays. It's not about love and kindness. It's about the house on the Black Hill. I gotta forewarn you as you hear this next tale. You may get a sense of chillness coming over your skin. You may get a sense of coldness coming over your body. And that is because this story comes to life as we begin to discuss the details of the house on the Black Hill. Now, the witness named Alex had always been skeptic in his village as a boy who scuffled at tales of the supernatural and the unknown. To him, the stories that the villagers whispered around campfires and during cold winter nights were nothing more than ghost stories meant to scare children. The one tale that intrigued him the most was the house on the Black Hill. Ominous structures perched on the hill that overlooked the village, like a vulture waiting for its next meal. The villagers claimed the house was cursed, alive with tortured souls of those who had dared to enter and never return. It was said that the house fed on the fear of the living, consuming anyone foolish enough to step inside. For Alex, the legend was just that, a legend. Nothing to fear, nothing to worry about. So when his friends dared him to explore the house, he accepted without hesitation. The thought of proving everyone wrong excited him. He was going to be the one who would return from Black Hill unscathed, with with a story of how he had conquered the fears that had held the village in thrall for generations. When Alex reached the front door, he paused for a moment, taking in the eerie stillness that surrounded the house. The village below was far behind him now, the lights of the home barely visible through the trees. He felt a twinge of unease, but quickly pushed it aside. He had come this far. There was no turning back now. He reached out and paused and pushed the door open. It creaked on its rustic hinges, and as soon as he stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind him with a force that rattled the walls, and as Alex spun around, the door was now locked, the handle cold and unyielding under his hand. The air inside the house was thick and musty, filled with scent of rot and decay. The wooden floorboards creaked beneath his feet, and the walls seemed to groan as if the house was alive and awe of his presence, aware of his presence. Undeterred, Alex moved deeper into the house. The interior was dark, the only light coming from the fading twilight that filtered through the grimy windows. Dusk hung in the air, and cobwebs draped over the corners like ancient curtains. And as he walked, he began to hear strange noises, footsteps echoing down empty hallways, whispers that seemed to come from the very walls themselves, and the soft scraping sound of something dragging along the floor. The house seemed to shift around him, the, lay, the layout changing as he moved from room to room. Hallways that should have led back to the entrance instead twisted and turned into the unfamiliar corridors. Doors that had been opened moments before were now sealed shut, and new doorsteps, new doorways appeared where there had been none. It was as if the house were a living, breathing creature, trapping him within its interiors. As the hours wore on, Alice's confidence began to worsen. The whispers grew louder, more intensified, and the house itself seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. The walls trembled and groaned, the floors beneath him vibrating with a rhythmic thrum that matched his own racing heartbeat. The house was feeding on his fear, drawing strength from his growing sense of dread. Finally, Alex found a staircase leading down to the basement. He hesitated at the foot top of the stairs, peering into the darkness below. The air that wafted up from the basement was damp, cold, carrying with it the faint stench of decay. He knew that whatever secrets the house held, they were hidden in the depths below. With a deep breath, Alex descended the staircase. The steps creaked under his weight, and the further down he went, the colder the air became. He reached the bottom and found himself in a large, cavernous room. The walls were slick with moisture, and the floor was covered in a thin layer of slimy black sludge. It was then that he felt a cold, slimy trindle brushing against his leg. He looked down in horror to see the floor itself beginning to move, the sludge withering and cooling like a living flesh. Panic surged through him, and he turned to flee, but the floor beneath him split open, revealing a gaping lined with sharp, jagged teeth. The walls around him trembled, the flesh like material pulsing with a sickening rhythm. He tried to scream, but the sound was swallowed up by the darkness as the maw closed around him, dragging him down into the depths of the house. The house consumed him, absorbing him into its structures, his body becoming one with the walls and floors. His screams joined the chorus of voices that echoed through the house, a canopy of tortured souls forever trapped within its living, breathing confines. The next morning the house on the black hill stood silent and still, its windows dark and empty. The villagers, unaware of what had transpired, continued to live in fear of the house, its curse remaining unbroken, and the house waited, its hunger sated for now, but always ready to claim its next victim. Thank you for staying with me this far into the night, into the frightful tales that you have been told. I hope that for those of you here are ready to take a plunge into the depths of the unknown as we go into this next story. First, I want to thank everybody in the chat for having the frightful courage to stay with me. This next tale is called The Haunted Mirror. Now, the witness Claire had always been fascinated by antiques, the allure of old objects with mysterious histories drawing her in like a moth to a flame. So when she found the mirror at a local market, she knew she had to have it. The mirror was beautiful, its frame covered with intrigued, swirling patterns that seemed almost alive, shifting and changing when she glanced away. The glass was polished to perfection, reflecting the world with an almost unnatural clarity. It was a piece that spoke of forgotten times and untold secrets, and Claire was captivated. The old man who sold it to her was eager to get rid of it, his hands trembling as he wrapped it up carefully in cloth, his eyes avoiding hers as he muttered something about the mirror being old and temperamental. Claire didn't pay much attention to his words. She was too intrigued by her new find. She carried the mirror home with a sense of excitement, eager to find the perfect spot for it in her bedroom. Once home, she hung the mirror in the wall opposite her bed, admiring how it caught the light and made her room feel larger and more mysterious. She stood in front of it, admiring her reflection, pleased with how the mirror seemed to enhance her features. But as she turned to leave, she thought she saw something move in the background, just a flicker, like a shadow passing quickly out of view. She shook her head, telling herself it was just her imagination, and went on with the day. Ah, that night, as Claire got ready for bed, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The mirror seemed to draw her attention, pulling her gaze towards it. Even when she tried to look away, she caught glimpses of things that shouldn't be there. Dark shapes lurking in the corners of the room, faces that weren't her own, staring back at her, the expressions twisted and unnatural. She tried to dismiss it as fatigue, but the unease making it difficult to fall asleep. Over the next few days, the strange occurrences only grew worse. The mirror's reflections became more distorted, more unsettling. Clary began to see her deepest fears play out in the glass. Visions of being lost in dark, endless void of the forces, figures reaching out to drag her down into the shadows. The mirror seemed to taunt her, showing her things she never wanted to see, things that left her feeling cold and hollow. Then comes the night when everything changed. That night, everything changed. Claire was brushing her hair in front of the mirror, trying to ignore the prickling sensations of being watched, when she noticed something strange. Her reflection wasn't moving in sync with her. She raised her head to touch her face. She raised her hand to touch her face, but the reflection didn't mimic the action. Instead, it stood there still as a statue, staring back at her with a smile that sent chills down her spine. The smile was wrong, too wide, too knowing. It was a smile that didn't belong on her face. And then reflections began to move on its own, slowly, deliberately, rising its hand to press against the glass. Claire's heart pounded in her chest. As the room grew cold, the temperature dropped so rapidly that her breath misted in the air. The mirror started to glow with an ease, sickly light casting long, unnatural shadows across the room. A whisper filled the air, soft at first but growing louder, more intense. It was coming from the mirror, from the twisted reflections that now seemed more real than she did. The voice was cold and malevolent, telling her that it wanted her, trapped, wanted her soul, that it had been waiting for someone like her, someone who could be trapped, someone who could take its place. Claire tried to tear her gaze away, but she couldn't. The mirror held its pull, irresistible. She felt herself being drawn closer, her body moving against her will. The reflections had pushed against the glass, and to her horror, it began to break through, the surface of the mirror rippling like water. The hand reached out, its fingers cold and solid as they wrapped around her wrist, pulling her towards the glass. She struggled, but the force was too strong. With a final desperate scream, Claire was yanked into the mirror, her body passing through the glass as if it were a doorway. On the other side, she found herself in a twisted, nightmarish version of her bedroom. The walls were dark and wrapped in the air, thick with a suffocating sense of dread. Everything was wrong, distorted as if she were seeing the world through a funhouse mirror. And there, standing on the other side of the glass, was her reflection. Only it wasn't hers anymore. It was the ghost of the malevolent spirit that had been trapped in the mirror for centuries, now free to walk in the real world, wearing her face. It turned and smiled at her one last time, a grin full of malice and triumph, before it stepped out of the room, leaving Claire trapped inside the mirror, pounding on the glass with no one to hear the screams. The next morning, Claire's family noticed a change in her. She was quieter, her movements a little too precise, her smile a little too wide. They dismissed it as fatigue or stress, never suspecting that the girl they saw was not their daughter, but a spirit that had taken her place. The haunted mirror remained in her room, its glass now dark and lifeless, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to look into its depth and fall victim to the curse within. The haunted mirror. We move to our final frightful tale of the evening. This story may be too much for some to handle. As with every episode of the Fright Files, the most haunting and frightful story is always saved for the end. And if you are still here with us, you have made it to the final chapter of the evening, the final story of the night. To all fans of Dr. Fright and the Fright Files, I present to you the Haunted Carnival. And for those wondering, are these stories real? They have not been proven real, and they have not been disproved as being real either. You, the fans of the Fright Files, can make your decisions in the chat. Do you feel these stories are real? Do you feel the witnesses are telling the truth? Or do you feel these stories are made up? But if you're here with us, let's check out the Haunted Carnival. As Sam had always been the type of boy who craved adventure in the sleepy village where nothing exciting ever seems to happen. He yearned for something more, something beyond the mundane routine of daily life. So when the traveling carnival rolled into town one foggy evening, its garish lights flickering in the distance, Sam's curse Sam's curiosity got the better of him. The villagers were suspicious of the carnival, whispering among themselves that it was cursed, that those who entered never returned, that those who entered never returned, those who entered never returned the same. But Sam dismissed their warnings as silly superstitions, too eager to experience the thrill of the unknown. The night after his parents had gone to bed, Sam slipped out of the house and made his way towards the carnival. The fog was thick, clinging to the ground like a living thing, and the further he went, the more the village seemed to disappear behind him. The music from the carnival floated through the mist, eerie and distorted, and the laughter of the few people there had an eager edge to make it that made Sam's skin prickle. But he pressed on, his excitement outweighing the growing unease in his gut. As Sam reached the carnival, he noticed that something was off. The lights, which should have been bright and inviting, flickering weakly as though struggling to stay alive. The rides moved with an agazing slowness, creaking and growling, grooming as if they were ancient, worn down by the time. The workers, dressed in faded costumes, watched him with hollow eyes, their smiles plastered on their pale faces but devoid of any warmth of joy. Despite the creeping sense of dread, Sam found himself drawn to a large tent at the center of the carnival, a sign above its entrance reading, "Enter if you dare. Enter if you dare." Without hesitation, Sam pushed aside the heavy canvas flap and stepped inside. The moment he crossed the threshold, the music outside cut off abruptly, leaving him in an eerie silence. The inside of the tent was dimly lit, with only a few flickering candles casting long, wavering shadows across the room. In the center of the tent stood a circle of mirrors, each one reflecting a different version of Sam. As he moved closer, Sam realized that the reflections were not simply showing his current self. They were showing what he could only have been described as they were showing what he could only have been, what he might have become, what he might have become if he had made different choices in life. One mirror showed him as a successful businessman, dressed in a sharp suit with a confident smile. Another showed him as a renewed artist, his hands stained without paint, and his eyes alit with passion. But there were darker reflections too, Two versions of himself twisted by anger, consumed by greed, or hollowed out by the despair. Sam's heart raced as he turned from one mirror to the next. The images moved vivid and real with each passing moment. Suddenly, the reflections began to move on their own, stepping out of the mirrors and surrounding him. They closed in the eyes They closed in, their eyes gleaming with an unnatural light, their faces twisted in cruel smiles. "You must choose," one of the workers said. "You must choose," his voice loud and cold. "Choose one of the reflections to replace you in the real world. Choose." Sam's mind raced as he tried to make sense of what was happening. Was this some kind of twisted game? But the worker's eyes bored into him, and and he knew he had no choice. He knew his gaze flickering from one reflection to another, searching for the one that seemed the most normal, the least dangerous. Finally he spotted it, a version of himself that looked just like him. No obvious distortions or twisted expressions. It was the closest thing to normal he could find. Taking a deep breath, Sam stepped towards the reflection, his hand outreached, but as soon as his fingers brushed against the mirror's surface, the reflection face twisted into a grotesque grin. The grin widened, a force its face, stretching unnaturally across its face as it reached out and grabbed Sam's wrist, pulling him into the mirror with a force that knocked the wind out of him. The world around him spun and wrapped, colors bleeding together into a nightmarish blur. With the spinning, when the spinning stopped, Sam found himself in a twisted version of the carnival, where everything was wrong. The lights were dark and flickering, the rides creaked and groaned like the dying, and the workers' faces were now hideous, distorted masks of their former selves. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and the sounds of laughter had turned to the walls of despair. Sam pounded on the mirror surface, trying to break free, but it was like striking solid stone. On the other side, his reflection, now no longer just a reflection, stepped out into the real world, stretching and flexing its limbs as if it had just woken from a long sleep. It turned to look at Sam, its grin now full, mocking sneer beneath it. It walked away, leaving Sam trapped in the nightmarish carnival. The next morning the villagers awoken to find the carnival gone, leaving behind no trace except for the eerie silence that lingered in the air. Sam's parents soon noticed that their son wasn't quite the same. He seemed colder, more distant, with a strange glint in his eyes that couldn't quite place, but by then it was too late to do anything about it. The real Sam was lost forever in the cursed carnival, trapped in a twisted world where reality and nightmares were once and the same. A twisted world where reality and nightmares were one and the same. And as the cursed carnival moved on to its next destination, it carried with it the echoes of the souls it had claimed, leaving only darkness, despair in its wake. Thank you for watching tonight's episode of the Fright Files. Thank you for being a fan of Dr. Fright. If you have stories you would like to share and have me read on the Fright Files, please send your stories to rascal.1@icloud.com. We would love to hear your stories and possibly read them on the air, if deemed frightful enough for the Fright Files. And if anybody has any thoughts or theories, do you feel these stories are real, or do you feel these stories are made fiction? As we go from one story to the next each week, the stories get more frightful. These stories have not been proven real, but they have not been disproved either as being false. The witnesses claim they know what they're just talking about. The witnesses claim they have lived through fear that nobody has ever deemed, that nobody has ever felt before. Thank you everybody for watching the Fright Files. We hope you have a wonderful holiday season, a frightful Christmas. We will see you next year, next week, another episode of the Fright Files.